Last night my son sold a piece of land for $40 million. He shook hands. He poured the champagne. He stood under a chandelier and let a photographer take his picture with his teeth showing. There was only one problem. That land was never his to sell. It has belonged to me for 41 years. My name is on the deed, my real name in my own hand, signed at a kitchen table in 1984, while my husband held a flashlight because the power company had shut our lights off again. Damon doesn't know that. Damon has spent 2 years and a great deal of money hunting for the mystery company that owns the center of Elmwood, the one block he needs and cannot buy. He has cursed that company at my dinner table. He has called it greedy. He has called it a ghost. He never once thought to ask the quiet old woman passing him the cornbread. My name is Olivia Grant. I am 68 years old. I live on Delacroix Street in the Elmwood neighborhood of Atlanta, in the same narrow house I've lived in since Gerald Ford was president. My knees ache when it rains. I forget where I put my glasses, and then I find them on my head. When my son and his wife talk about money, they lower their voices the way you do around a child or a dog. Something present in the room but not expected to understand. I let them. I have let them for a long time now, because a woman learns things when the world decides she's finished. She learns who reaches for her arm on the stairs and who lets her find the railing alone. She learns which people speak to her and which people speak around her. And she learns, if she's patient, exactly how much they'll gamble on the idea that she isn't paying attention. My Damon gambled everything. He just doesn't know it yet. He thinks last night was the biggest night of his life. He stood up there in his good suit, my baby the boy I taught to tie his shoes on that very porch, and he told a room full of investors that he was going to bring Elmwood into the future and leave the poverty of the past behind. He said it with his father's chin and his mother-in-law's smile. And the whole time, 3 feet behind the last table, an old woman in a cardigan stood watching him sell a future that was already quietly, completely hers. I didn't say a word. I've waited 41 years. I can wait a little longer. You have to understand how they see me. Not out of cruelty, I want to be fair, because this is a story about my family, and I loved them before I ever had cause to teach them a lesson. It isn't cruelty. It's something quieter and harder to forgive. It's the assumption. The settled, comfortable, everyday assumption that grandma is furniture. Let me show you a Sunday. Every second Sunday, Damon and Bianca come for dinner. I still cook. I've cooked Sunday dinner in that kitchen for 4 decades, and I'm not about to stop because my hip complains. I make the smothered chicken. Walter loved the greens with the smoked turkey, the mac and cheese that his mother taught me before she passed. My granddaughter Nia comes too when her classes let her, and she's the one bright coin in the whole afternoon, but I'll get to Nia. They arrive. Bianca kisses the air beside my cheek and sets down a store-bought pie she knows I won't touch because she knows I bake, and that's the little needle in it. Damon comes in already talking, always already talking, phone in one hand, the other hand loosening a tie that costs more than my monthly pension check. He kisses the top of my head. Hey, Ma. And then he's gone into the living room, into the deal, into whatever it is that lives inside that phone, and eats his attention whole. We sit. I say grace because I still say grace in my own house. And then the conversation happens over my head like weather. The Elmwood parcel's still stuck. Damon says, forking chicken onto his plate. 2 years, Bianca. 2 years I've been chasing this. Everybody around the block folded the Franklins, sold the church, sold that old barbershop, sold. But the middle's owned by some shell company out of nowhere. Ridgeline Holdings. No address that means anything a lawyer who won't return a call. They won't even name a price. He shakes his head like a man betrayed. Who holds land in the middle of a $40 million development and won't take a meeting? It's insane. Language, Bianca murmurs, glancing at me the way you'd glance at a lamp you were worried might be listening. I pass the greens. My hand does not shake. Inside my chest, something old and slow turns over the way a key turns in a lock that hasn't been opened in years. Ridgeline Holdings. I keep my eyes on my plate. I say, more greens, baby, and Damon says, no, Ma, I'm good, and goes right back to the deal, and Bianca exhales relieved that the lamp didn't have anything to add. You see how it works. I have sat at that table and listened to my son describe me as a problem, as a wall, as a ghost standing between him and everything he wants. And he looked right at me while he did it, and he saw a tired woman who makes good greens. It wasn't always like this. I want you to know that, because I don't want you thinking I raised a monster. I didn't. I raised a sweet boy who cried at dog commercials and saved his allowance for 2 months to buy me a bottle of dime store perfume for Mother's Day, and I wore it until it was gone, and then I kept the empty bottle. Somewhere between that boy and this man something got in. Ambition, maybe. Or shame, the particular shame of a boy from a red-line neighborhood who got out, got the degree, got the corner office, and started to hear his own beginnings as an accusation. Damon doesn't hate where he comes from. It's worse than that. He's embarrassed by it. And a man embarrassed by his own foundation will do a great deal to pour concrete over it. The second Sunday of last month he came in worse than usual. Didn't kiss the top of my head. Sat down already arguing with somebody who wasn't there, thumb hammering the phone. When Bianca asked him to please put it away for Grace, he set it face down beside his plate like a man surrendering a weapon he fully intended to pick back up. "It's the shell company again," he said before I'd even finished the blessing. "Ridgeline. My whole timeline runs through that one block and I cannot get a human being on the phone." He rubbed his eyes. "I've got people counting on me, Ma. Serious people. I told them Elmwood was locked. I put my name on it." "You put your name on a lot of things lately," Bianca said quietly, and there was something under it, a thread of worry I filed away and did not comment on. She caught herself and smoothed it over. "I just mean you work too hard, baby." "I work as hard as I have to." He finally looked up, and for a second I saw the boy in him tired and scared under all that suit. "This is the one, Ma. This closes and we never worry again. Nia's tuition, the house, all of it. This is me taking care of this family. And Lord help me." I nearly reached across the table and told him everything right then. Because he meant it. That's the part that breaks your heart. As a mother, he wasn't lying about wanting to take care of us. He just couldn't imagine, not for 1 second, that the thing standing in his way and the woman passing him the greens were the same person. His care and his contempt lived in him side by side and never once spoke to each other. I passed the greens. "Eat, baby," I said. "It'll work out." "It surely will." Ridgeline Holdings is not a ghost. Ridgeline Holdings is a promise Walter and I made in the dark 41 years ago, and I am its only living officer, and the lawyer who won't return a call returns my calls before the second ring because I pay her to and because she loved my husband. But Damon doesn't know that. Damon has never once in 2 years of hunting thought to look across his mother's dinner table. Why would he grandma his furniture? It got worse when Gloria came into it. I should tell you about Gloria. Gloria Prewitt is Bianca's mother, and if you have ever in your life met a woman who clawed her way up from nothing and then spent the rest of her days making sure everybody knew she'd left nothing behind, you have met Gloria. She came up hard, I'll give her that, and I do give her that, because I came up hard too, and I know what it costs. But it curdled in her. Some people survive the cold and it makes them warm to others who are still out in it. Some people survive the cold and spend forever building a bigger fire that only they get to sit by. Gloria runs Prewitt Realty. She wears white in a way that dares the world to spill on her. And she looks at me, at my house, my cardigan, my 40-year-old furniture, my hands, which are a working woman's hands. She looks at all of it, and she sees the past, the thing she escaped, and it offends her that I'm not ashamed of it. The first time she came to my home, she stood in my living room turned in a slow circle and said to Bianca in front of me, "Well, it's sweet," the way you'd say it about a child's drawing. And a month ago, I'll never forget this, and you'll understand later why it matters. Damon threw a little celebration when the last of the surrounding parcels came together. They had it at a restaurant downtown, one of those places where the water costs money. I wasn't going to go. These things aren't for me. But Nia asked me to come, so I came. And I was standing near the coat check, waiting invisible in my good navy dress, when I heard Gloria's voice behind a pillar. "Who invited the church lady?" she said, and then lower to Bianca. "Sugar, you have got to talk to Damon about facilities for his mother. She can't keep rattling around that little house alone. It's not dignified. Facilities. She meant a home. She meant somewhere to file me." I stood very still behind that pillar, 68 years old, and I felt the old heat come up my neck, and then I felt something else. Something colder and far more useful settle down over it like a hand pressing a lid onto a pot. Because here is what Gloria Prewitt does not know. Prewitt Realty is drowning. I don't say that with joy, I say it because it's true, and because it will matter. Gloria over-leveraged 3 years ago betting on a development that never broke ground, and she has been shuffling debt from shoulder to shoulder ever since the way you carry a heavy bag to keep either arm from giving out. She wears white, and she talks about dignity and facilities, and she is one bad quarter from losing all of it. I know this the way I know most things, quietly, because I looked. A woman who spent 30 years reading contracts for widows who couldn't read them themselves learns how to read a balance sheet, and a company that's healthy doesn't refinance the same debt 3 times in 18 months. Gloria's white suits are paid for on borrowed time. She just doesn't know that anybody's noticed, least of all the church lady she wants to file away in a facility. I didn't know that night, standing behind the pillar, what I would do with it. I only knew the way I've always known, that it was better to hold a thing and not need it than to need a thing and not hold it. Walter taught me that. Walter, who bought a whole neighborhood one lot at a time while men in nicer suits laughed at him, and who never once corrected them, because a man who lets you laugh at him is a man who's counting your teeth. Who invited the church lady? Oh, Gloria, you have no idea whose church it is. Now, let me tell you who I actually am, because you can't understand what I did unless you understand what I built, and you can't understand what I built unless you go back 41 years to a young black couple standing on an empty lot in a neighborhood the banks had drawn a red line around and decided to let die. His name was Walter Grant. He was a bricklayer. Big hands, quiet voice, a laugh that started somewhere down around his boots and took its time getting to the surface. I was a seamstress. I did alterations out of the front room of a shop on Delacroix, and I was good enough that white women drove in from the nice parts of town to have me take in their daughters' wedding gowns and then drove back out again like they'd never been. We didn't have money. Understand that. When we bought our first lot in Elmwood in 1984, we bought it because it was cheap, and it was cheap because the banks had redlined the whole neighborhood. You couldn't get a mortgage in Elmwood if you were an angel with a co-signer, so the land went for nothing. Boarded houses, empty lots, weeds coming up through the sidewalks. The city had written us off. Everybody had. Everybody except Walter. I remember the night we signed for that first lot. Power company had cut our lights that week we were choosing that month between the light bill and the down payment, and Walter chose the land. He held a flashlight in his teeth while I signed the papers at the kitchen table, and when I was done, he took the flashlight out and looked at me in the dark and said, "Livy, they think this place is worthless." He tapped the deed. That's the same as them handing it to us. A thing is only worth what people think it's worth until it isn't. And one day, baby, they're going to remember Elmwood exists. And when they do, I want us to already be here. All of us, owning the ground under our own feet. I thought he was dreaming. I'll be honest with you. I loved that man to the bottom of my soul, and I thought he was a beautiful dreamer. He wasn't dreaming. He was early. Over the next 15 years, we bought Elmwood, one lot at a time. A little more each year out of the alterations money and the bricklaying money in a jar we kept in the wall behind the pantry. When our neighbors wanted to sell and move out to where the jobs were, we bought from them at a fair price, a real one more than the city said the land was worth, and we let a lot of them keep living in the houses at rents they could carry. We weren't landlords the way you think of landlords. We were the reason half of Elmwood didn't get scattered to the wind in the 80s. I remember the winter of '88 when Miss Ernestine Poole, 2 doors down, lost her husband, and a man from a company downtown showed up on her porch the very week of the funeral, offering her $900 for her lot and her house cash today before she'd had time to wash the casserole dishes. $900 for a life. Walter walked over that same evening, sat on her porch with his hat in his hands, and bought it for $11,000, everything we had in the jar behind the pantry, and then some, and told her she'd never pay a dime of rent as long as she drew breath. She lived there 16 more years. That's who Walter was. And that lot, the one he paid $11,000 for out of a coffee jar to keep a widow in her home, is on the survey my son's investors circled in red last week and labeled Parcel 14 Acquire or Condemn. We did that 100 times. A little each year out of the alterations money and the bricklaying money in that jar in the wall. We never bought a thing we couldn't pay for, and we never took a thing from a soul who didn't want to sell. By the time the 90s came, 2 people the whole city had written off owned the center of a neighborhood the whole city was about to remember, and Walter being. Walter saw what was coming even then. He saw that one day the money would come back to Elmwood, and when it came, it would come like a flood, and a flood doesn't care who's standing in it. So he did 2 things. First, he put every parcel we owned into a holding company so it couldn't be picked apart or traced back to 2 black nobodies who'd outbought the whole tax office. He named it after my mother's people, the Ridgelines out of South Carolina, the folks I came from. Ridgeline Holdings. No Grant in the name, nothing to point back at us. "Let 'em wonder," Walter said. "Let 'em think it's some big fish. The day they find out it's just us, that'll be a good day, Livy. But we'll pick when. 41 years later, my son stood at his own dinner table and called Ridgeline Holdings a ghost. He was righter than he knew. It's the ghost of his father. The second thing Walter did was build the house. On the best lot, we owned the corner of Delacroix and Vine, right in the heart of the block, the exact piece of ground my son now needs for his Sky Lounge. Walter built the Elmwood Community House with his own 2 hands. 38 years it stood there. He laid every brick himself, evenings and weekends, for 2 years, and half the men in the neighborhood came and laid brick beside him for nothing but the supper I cooked. You want to know what that building has been? It's been everything. It's where the neighborhood kids learned to read when the school couldn't be bothered. I ran the reading tables myself, Tuesday and Thursday, for 30 years. 30 years of small fingers dragging under the words of, "Sound it out, baby, you almost had it." Of the exact moment, and there's nothing like it on this earth, when a child stops guessing and starts reading, when the letters quit being a wall and turn into a door. I gave that door to more children than I can count. Some of them are doctors now. One of them delivers my mail. And one of them, a little boy with his father's chin, learned his letters at my Tuesday table before he learned to be ashamed of the room they were taught in. It's where we fed breakfast to children whose mothers worked the early shift. It's where we held the funerals for folks who couldn't afford a funeral home, and the weddings for folks who couldn't afford a hall, and where every graduating senior in Elmwood for 3 decades got their name written up on the wall of the front room in Walter's own hand. Every name. He kept a nail and a wood-burning pen, and when a child of Elmwood did something learned to read, graduated, came home from the service, Walter burned their name into the pine paneling of that front room, low down where a child could see it, and he'd kneel and let them watch him do it. There is a name on that wall about knee-high in slightly shaky letters, because the boy insisted on guiding Walter's hand. Damon, age 7. My son helped burn his own name into the wall of the building he sold last night for $40 million. He's forgotten. Of course he's forgotten. He was 7. But I haven't. That wall is the last place on this earth I can still see Walter's hands moving, and my son signed a paper to knock it down and put up a bar. He doesn't know it's mine. He doesn't know it was ever his. That's the part that Gloria and Bianca and even Damon have never once suspected, that the sweet church lady in the little house isn't clinging to the past out of sentiment. I'm not clinging to anything. I am holding the deed to the ground they're standing on, and I have been holding it patiently in plain sight for their entire adult lives. There are 3 people I trust with the truth. Not one of them shares my last name at Sunday dinner. The first is Miriam Ellison. She's my lawyer, has been for 25 years, since she was a young thing fresh out of school that Walter took a chance on when the big firms wouldn't have her either. She knows every corner of Ridgeline. She's the lawyer who won't return calls, and she doesn't return theirs because I told her not to. Miriam would walk into fire for me, and more to the point, Miriam is very, very good, and the men in the nice suits have absolutely no idea she's coming. The second is Clarence Boyd. He laid brick beside Walter for 30 years, and he's the only other soul with a key to the community house. Clarence is 71 and moves slow and misses nothing. He's the one who called me 3 weeks ago and said, "Livy, you need to come see what they've got planned for the house." Clarence is how I found out. And the third is my Naya. My granddaughter is 20 years old, and she is the finest thing this family ever made. She's a junior at Spelman, wants to do urban planning of all things, wants to spend her life keeping neighborhoods like this one from being flooded away. She doesn't know I'm smiling every time she says it. She thinks she came to this on her own. Here is what nobody in my family knows. 6 months ago, Nia came to me upset because she'd found out through her community organizing group that a developer was assembling parcels in Elmwood to run the old residents out, and she didn't know yet that the developer was her own father. She came to me because I'm the one she tells things to. And I looked at that girl so much like Walter around the eyes, so full of fight, and I made a decision. I told her the truth. Not all of it, not that night. But enough. I told her that her grandmother was not what she seemed. I told her about Ridgeline. I asked her to be my eyes, to bring me everything her organizing group learned, every filing, every rumor, every name on every document, and to tell no one, not her mother, not her father, not a soul. She looked at me for a long moment, my quiet grandmother in her cardigan, and then something moved behind her eyes, some recognition, like a girl seeing the whole ocean where she'd always thought there was a pond. "Grandma," she said, "how long have you been sitting on this?" "Baby," I said, "I've been sitting on this since before your father could tie his shoes." She sat down hard on my sofa, the sofa Gloria called sweet, and she was quiet a long time. I watched her put it together piece by piece, the way she puts everything together, that good mind of hers turning it over. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. "All those Sunday dinners," she said. "All those times they talked over you, about money, about the deal." She looked up at me and her eyes were shining and furious. Not at me, for me. "You just sat there. You let them think—" "I let them think exactly what they wanted to think," I said. "There's power in that Nia. More power than in any argument you could win at a dinner table. You let a person show you who they are when they're sure you can't do anything about it. And then you remember." I took her hands. "Your grandfather taught me that. A man who lets you laugh at him is a man who's counting your teeth." She let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something else. "That is the most terrifying thing anyone in this family has ever said to me." "I know it," I said. "Now dry your face. I need those eyes working, not crying." And she did. Lord, did she. That girl started bringing me things I couldn't have gotten myself in 10 years, the filings, the surveys, the investor list, the name of the firm, the timeline. She sits in those organizing meetings looking like a heartbroken college kid watching her neighborhood get sold, and every soul in the room feels sorry for her. And nobody knows she goes home and hands the whole thing to a 68-year-old woman in a cardigan who owns the very ground they're fighting over. My inside line. My husband's eyes come again in a 20-year-old girl. She's been my inside line ever since. Every document that crosses that organizing group's table I see. Which is how I know exactly what my son is planning, exactly how far along it is, and exactly down to the day how much time I have before he does something to that wall that can't be undone. So that's who I am. Not a wall, not a ghost, not a church lady rattling around a little house. I'm the owner. I've always been the owner. They spent 40 years looking straight past me. Starting now, I'm going to make every one of those years count. There is one day a year I hold sacred, and my son knew it. Walter passed 9 years ago. This month went to sleep beside me on an ordinary Tuesday and simply didn't wake, which is a mercy, I've decided, though it took me years to call it that. Every year on the anniversary, I go to the community house at dusk, and I light candles along the front windowsill, one for every year we had, and I sit in the room he built with his hands, and I talk to him a while. Foolish, maybe, but that room is the last place his hands still show, and a widow takes her husband where she can find him. For 9 years, I've done it mostly alone with Clarence and sometimes Naya, but 3 weeks ago at Sunday dinner, Damon surprised me. He put down his phone. He actually put it down and he said, "Ma, this year I want to bring the family, for Dad, Bianca and Nia and me. We'll light the candles together." And I looked at my son, and my old heart, which should have known better, opened right up like it was spring. "I'd love that baby," I said. "Your father would love that." I bought extra candles. The evening came. I put on the good navy dress. I made the sweet potato pie Walter liked and set it on the counter to bring. I sat by the window at 5 o'clock, then 5:30, then 6, watching the light go gold, and then gray over Delacroix Street, my purse in my lap, like a girl waiting on a boy who isn't coming. At 6:40, my phone buzzed. "Ma, so sorry, something came up at work. Huge meeting, I can't move. Rain check on the candle thing. Love you." The candle thing. I sat there holding the phone. And I'll tell you the truth. It wasn't anger I felt first. It was that old tired ache a mother knows too well, the one that says I should have known, I always know, why do I let myself hope? I set the phone face down, and I looked at Walter's picture on the wall, and I said out loud, "Well, it's you and me again, old man." And then somebody knocked at my door. It was Clarence. Had in his hands face like a closed fist. He'd been crying or near to it, and Clarence Boyd is not a man who cries. "Livy," he said, "get your coat. There's something you need to see, and I'd rather you hear it from your own eyes than from me." He wouldn't tell me where we were going. He drove downtown, which was already wrong. The community house is 6 blocks the other way, and he pulled up in front of the Whitfield Hotel, one of those glass towers where the doormen wear gloves. There was a banner out front, lit up gold and blue. Elmwood Crossing, a new vision. Investor Gala. I understood before we got out of the car. But understanding a thing and seeing it are two different animals, and Clarence knew that, which is why he brought me. We went in the side way. Clarence knows every service door in this city, and we stood at the back of a ballroom full of people in clothes that cost more than my house, holding little glasses of champagne. And at the center of that room, up on a lit platform, was a model of my neighborhood. They'd built the whole thing in miniature Elmwood in white foam and tiny trees, except it wasn't Elmwood anymore. Where Delacroix and Vine meet, where Walter laid every brick himself, where I ran my reading tables for 30 years, where a little boy burned his name into the wall at knee height, there was no community house. In its place, glinting under a tiny spotlight, was a tower, and a little placard beside it read, "The Vine Rooftop Sky Lounge." They had erased him. In the little foam city, my husband had never existed. And standing beside the model, one hand resting on the top of that tower like a man laying claim to a hill in a tuxedo I'd never seen holding a microphone, was my son. Because Elmwood has potential, Damon was saying, and the room was hanging on him, and Lord, he was good at it. He had his father's chin and a stranger's heart. For too long, this neighborhood has been defined by what it lacked, by poverty, by the past. Tonight we draw a line. Elmwood Crossing isn't about tearing something down. It's about finally building something worthy of this land. Worthy of this land. The land his father bought out of a coffee jar to keep a widow in her home. The land I have held in trust for 41 years, so that no man in a tuxedo could ever do exactly this. He raised his glass. To the future. To the future. The room echoed and the glasses caught the light, and my son smiled his beautiful stolen smile, and not once, not one time in that whole speech did he say the name Walter Grant. He stood on the ground his father built, and he told a room full of strangers that the ground had been worthless until he came along. That was the moment you understand. Not the missed birthday years ago, not the candle thing text an hour before. This. My son had looked me in the eye at my own table and called this deal a work meeting. And the meeting was this, the ceremonial erasure of his father presided over by his father's son for money. I did not make a sound. I have made a life's practice of not making a sound. I stood at the back of that gold room and I watched, and inside me something that had been sleeping a long, long time sat up and opened both its eyes. And then across all those glittering heads I found one face I knew, Nia. My granddaughter was near the front on the edge of it in a plain dark dress among all that silver and gold. Her father had brought her, I suppose, to stand pretty beside the family on his big night, not knowing she was the crack in his whole foundation. She wasn't clapping. She was watching him with an expression I'd never seen on a child's face at a party, grief and fury and a terrible grown-up patience. And then, like she felt me the way you feel a warm spot on cold water, she turned her head and found me at the back of the room. Our eyes met over that whole champagne crowd. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She gave me the smallest nod in the history of the world, a nod that said, "I see you and I know what he's doing and I'm with you, Grandma." And then she turned back to face the stage so no one would wonder why the developer's daughter was looking at the church lady in the back. That nod steadied me more than anything Clarence could have said. I was not alone in that room after all. My husband's eyes were in it twice, once burned into a wall 6 blocks away, and once looking right at me out of a 20-year-old girl's face. Off to the side near the model I saw Bianca in silver radiant clapping, and I saw Gloria Pruitt in white, as always being handed a bouquet by a young man in a blazer, while a photographer crouched being honored, if you please, some plaque or other community partner. Gloria turned bouquet in her arms, and her eyes swept the back of the room and landed on me. For just a second she froze. Then she leaned to the woman beside her, some bored wife, and I watched her mouth move, and though I couldn't hear it over the applause, I have learned to read a cruel mouth at 40 paces. That's the developer's mother. Bless her heart. She still lives in one of the little houses. We keep trying to move her somewhere appropriate. Somewhere appropriate. I have a place appropriate for you, Gloria. It's called The Truth, and you're going to be standing in it very soon. I touched Clarence's arm. I've seen enough, I said. Take me home. He looked at me worried. Livy? I'm all right, Clarence. And I was. That was the strange thing. I was calmer than I'd been in years. Take me home. I've got calls to make. We left before my son ever knew his mother had watched him bury his father in foam and champagne. But I didn't have Clarence take me home. Not right away. I had him take me to the community house. It was full dark by then. I let myself in with my own key, the key I've carried on the same ring for 38 years, and I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I know that room the way I know my own hands. I walked to the front wall, the one with the paneling Walter cut and sanded and hung himself, and I put my palm against it in the dark. Cool pine worn smooth by 40 years of children's fingers. And I found them the way you find words in a book you've read 1,000 times, low down knee height. The names my husband burned into the wood for every child of Elmwood who ever did a thing worth remembering. Rosalind Kevin, little James, who read a whole book. Tanya First in her family college. Names and names and names. A whole neighborhood of children, and my Walter on his knees for every one of them with his wood-burning pen and a child's hand over his to help. And there where I knew it would be, my fingers found it in the dark. Damon, age 7. Shaky letters because he'd insisted on guiding his daddy's hand. I have buried a husband. I have carried more grief in this life than I'll name to you. And I stood there in the dark with my hand on my son's name, the name he helped burn into the wall of the room he'd just sold. And for the first time in this whole long story, I broke. I'm not ashamed to tell you, I cried. I sat down right there on the floor. Walter laid an old woman in a good navy dress, and I put both hands over that name like I could keep it warm. And I wept, not because my son had lied to me. Not because he'd missed the candles or called me furniture or let his mother-in-law talk about facilities. I wept because the little boy I taught to read at the Tuesday table, the boy who guided his father's hand across this wall, the boy who saved 2 months of allowance for a bottle of dime store perfume, that boy grew up into a man who would pay $40 million to knock this wall to dust and never once feel his own name break under the hammer. That's the thing they never understand about us, the ones they call furniture. We don't grieve the insult. We grieve the child. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough. And then I did what Walter always did. After a hard cry, I wiped my face with the flat of my hand, and I breathed. And I got up because sitting on the floor never fixed a single thing in the history of the world. I took out my phone. The screen lit up my husband's wall, all those burning names. I called the one number I've kept at the top of my list for 25 years. She answered on the first ring the way she always does. Olivia, it's near 10 o'clock. Are you all right? Miriam, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was surprised a little that it didn't shake. It's me. What's wrong? I put my hand flat on Damon's name one more time. Then I stood up straight in the dark room my husband built 68 years old, and I felt every one of those years turn into something with edges. It's time, I said. Wake up the file, all of it. We move on Ridgeline. There was a pause on the line, the pause of a woman who's been waiting 25 years to hear those exact words. Olivia, Miriam said, and I could hear her sitting up, hear the lawyer come awake in her. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no quiet way back. They'll all know who you are. I looked at my husband's wall of children at the tower they wanted to put where his house had stood. Miriam, I said, I have been quiet for 41 years. I'm done being quiet. Meet me at your office at 7. Here's what most people don't know about power. Power isn't loud. The loud ones aren't powerful. They're performing power, which is a different thing and much weaker. Real power is quiet and patient, and it does its best work while the loud ones are busy toasting the future. For the next 6 days, while my son and his investors drank champagne and told each other the deal was as good as done, I went to war in a lawyer's office, and not one of them heard a shot fired. Miriam and I laid it out on her conference table like a quilt. 41 years of deeds. The Ridgeline Trust documents. The tax records everyone paid on time in cash for 4 decades. And at the center of it, the thing that made all their champagne worthless, the deed to the central block. Delacroix and Vine. The community house and the 4 parcels around it, the exact heart of Elmwood Crossing the Peace, without which their whole $40 million tower was just a drawing. They cannot close, Miriam said, running her finger down the survey, without the signature of the owner of these parcels. There is no version of this deal that exists without you. Every dollar they've raised, every investor they've signed, every promise your son has made, all of it runs straight through your signature, and they don't even know your name. 2 years he's been hunting Ridgeline, I said, and Ridgeline was passing him the greens. Miriam took off her glasses and looked at me the way she does when she's about to say the true thing under the legal thing. Olivia, I have to ask you plainly because once we walk in there, I can't unask it. You could stop this without ever showing your face. 1 letter from me, Ridgeline, declines to sell, and it's over. The deal dies. They lose the money and you stay the sweet old lady on Delacroix. Nobody ever has to know what you are. Is that what you want? I thought about that. I did. There's a part of an old black woman that has learned down in the marrow that being unknown is being safe, that the world does its worst to the ones it can see. 41 years that instinct kept us. Stay small. Stay quiet. Let them wonder. But I'd sat on the floor of my husband's house with my hand on my son's name, and I was done being safe. No, I said. I've been the ghost long enough, Miriam. A ghost can't teach anybody anything. If I stop this in the dark, Damon just loses a deal and never learns the lesson. He'll spend the rest of his life thinking some faceless company beat him, and he'll do the exact same thing to some other neighborhood next year. No. I put my hand flat on the deed. He needs to see my face. He needs to know it was his mother's land, his mother's name, his mother the whole time. That's not revenge. That's the only way the lesson lands. Miriam put her glasses back on. Then we walk in, she said. And God help them. There's more, she said after a moment, and she pulled out a second folder, and this is where my Nia earned her keep. Because it was Nia who'd found it buried in the investor filings her organizing group had pried loose the quiet money behind Elmwood Crossing, the firm that had staked its own credit to keep the whole thing standing while Damon cleared the title. Prewitt Realty. Gloria Prewitt had bet her sinking company on this deal. She'd pledged Prewitt Realty's assets as backing to hold the investors steady, the same drowning company I'd watched refinance itself 3 times in 18 months. If Elmwood Crossing lived, Gloria was saved. If it died, Gloria went down with it. Now I want to be careful here because this is the part where a lesser woman gets greedy and a smarter woman gets precise. I did not go looking to hurt Gloria, but a woman had called me a facility case, and now that same woman had bet her whole life on knocking down my husband's wall, and the good Lord had set the situation in my lap like a cat. Her paper's for sale, Miriam said, reading my face. Her lenders are nervous. They've been nervous for a year. There's a distressed note, a big one that her bank has been quietly shopping to get it off their books before it goes bad. Anybody with cash could buy it. Cheap, relatively. And whoever holds that note holds Prewitt Realty by the throat. I thought about who invited the church lady. I thought about somewhere appropriate. I thought about the way that woman looked at my hands. Buy it, I said, quietly, through Ridgeline, today if you can. Miriam wrote it down. You understand what that makes you. It makes me Gloria Prewitt's creditor, I said. It makes the church lady the one holding the collection plate. I folded my hands. She spent 15 years looking down her nose at my furniture. Let's see how she likes owing it money. I'll have it done by Friday, Miriam said. The bank will practically kiss me for taking it. They've wanted that note off their books for a year. They'll sell to a quiet buyer at a discount. And never ask who's behind the LLC. By the weekend, Ridgeline owns Gloria's debt. And Gloria won't have the first idea her lifeline is being held by the woman she wants to put in a home. I sat with that a moment, and I'll be honest with you, because I've been honest this whole way, it did not feel bad. I know the church teaches otherwise, and I'll answer for it. But there is a particular sweetness at 68 in discovering that the very smallness they assigned you. The little house, the working hands, the bless her heart was never smallness at all. It was cover, and now the cover was coming off. One more thing, I told Miriam. When the time comes, I don't want to ruin her. Understand me. I'm not Gloria. I don't need to watch anybody drown. I just need her to know once in her life whose water she's standing in. That's twist enough for one woman's week, you'd think. But my family wasn't finished handing me weapons. While I worked in the quiet, Damon worked in the loud, and Lord, he was confident. Nia kept me fed with every detail. She'd sit at those meetings, heartbroken college girl, and come home and lay it all in my lap. He was so sure. That was the thing. 2 years hunting Ridgeline, and never a whisper back. And instead of reading that silence as a warning, my son read it as weakness. He decided Ridgeline was some absentee holding company that would fold the second real pressure came. He told his investors the title was 95% cleared. He told his boss, Douglas Vaughn, the big man at the firm, the one whose good opinion Damon had chased his whole career, that Elmwood was locked and loading. Nia was in the outer office the afternoon Damon walked Vaughn through it, and she told me every word. Vaughn is one of those men who smiles with his mouth and audits with his eyes, and he'd started asking hard questions about the unresponsive owner. So my son did what he's always done when a room starts to doubt him. He got bigger, louder, certain. Douglas, I promise you this is handled, Damon said. The owner's a shell, no address, no operating business, probably some heirs sitting on paper they don't even understand. We file to force the sale. The judge sees an abandoned parcel and it clears. These people have been sitting on this land for decades, doing nothing with it. Nobody's home. Trust me, I know this neighborhood. I grew up in it. There is nobody there to fight us. Nobody's home, nobody there to fight. My grandbaby had to sit at her desk and keep her face still while her father told the most powerful man at his firm that his own mother didn't exist. She said Vaughn nodded slow and said, "For your sake, son, I hope you're right, because you put your own name on this one." And Damon smiled that beautiful borrowed smile and said, "I know exactly whose land this is." Oh, baby, no you don't. And to keep those investors from walking while he chased my signature, my son did a thing so reckless it took my breath when Nia told me. He personally guaranteed the deal. To hold the money in place, Damon put up his own name, and behind his name, the family home. The house he and Bianca live in, the house Nia grew up in, pledged as collateral against a bridge loan to keep Elmwood Crossing breathing while he cleared the title he was certain he'd clear. He staked his house on land he did not own. He bet his family's roof on forcing a sale out of a company he thought was a ghost that was in fact his mother sitting in a lawyer's office 6 blocks away, holding the one signature that could save him or sink him. Bianca found the papers. Nia told me that too heard her parents through the wall, her mother's voice going high and thin. You put the house up, Damon, you put up the house, for land we don't even own yet. And my son, my confident drowning son. Bianca, trust me, it's a formality. The title clears next week. I've got this. He did not have this. I sat in my little house that night, the sweet little house, the facility house, and I held all of it in my hands like cards. The deed that could sink his deal, the note that could sink his mother-in-law, the house he'd bet on my mercy without knowing it was my mercy he was betting on. My son had spent 2 years in his family's roof to pry open a door, and behind that door the whole time waiting patiently in a cardigan was me. I could have ended it that week with one phone call. Just had Miriam send a letter, Ridgeline Holdings will not sell. Cease and desist. The deal collapses, the investors bolt, the bridge loan comes due, and my son loses the house, and Gloria loses her company, and the tower never rises over Walter's wall. But that's not justice. That's just a bigger hammer. And I didn't spend 41 years holding this land so I could swing a hammer. Walter didn't buy Elmwood out of a coffee jar so his widow could break their grandchild's family for spite. No. When I stepped into the light, and I was going to step into the light in front of every last one of them, it wasn't going to be to destroy. It was going to be to choose. On my terms. With my name. Out loud at last. I told Miriam to let the closing go forward. To let them book the big conference room at Kessler, and Vaughn let them gather the investors and the lawyers and the champagne. Let Damon stand up one more time, certain he'd won. You want to walk into the closing, Miriam said. Not a question. I want to walk into the closing, I said. Then Nia called and the clock started. Because Damon's lawyers, impatient with the unresponsive Ridgeline, had filed to force my hand a petition to have the central parcels declared abandoned and pushed to a quiet title sale on the theory that no real owner would stay this silent this long. It was a bluff built on their own blindness. The parcels weren't abandoned, the taxes were paid, and it would never have survived me showing up. But here was the thing Nia had just learned, her voice tight on the phone. Grandma, they moved the hearing up. Dad's lawyers pushed it. It's not next month anymore. The judge could rule on the parcels in 48 hours. And the closing, Grandma, they scheduled the closing for the morning right before it, so they can walk into that hearing waving a signed deal. 48 hours. For 41 years, I'd had all the time in the world. Now I had 2 days to walk into a room full of people who thought I was furniture and show them exactly whose house they'd been standing in. I hung up the phone. I looked at Walter's picture on the wall. All right, old man, I said, let's go get our name back. The closing was set for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning in the biggest conference room at Kessler and Vaughn, 40 floors up, with a wall of glass that looked out over the whole city, including, if you knew where to look, the low brown roofs of Elmwood far below. I dressed carefully that morning. Not the navy dress I wear to be invisible. I went into the back of my closet and I took out the suit-deep plum good wool, the one Walter bought me for our 40th anniversary, the last real gift he ever gave me. For the day you finally let him see you, Livy, he'd said, and I'd laughed and hung it up and never worn it, because that day never seemed to come. It came. I put it on. I pinned my mother's brooch at the collar. I looked at myself in the mirror, 68 years old, silver hair, a working woman's hands, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't see furniture. I saw the owner of the ground under half a neighborhood. I saw Walter's widow come to collect. All right, old man, I said to his picture. Let's go. Miriam picked me up at 8:30. She had the real file, 4 decades thick, tied with a ribbon like a thing you'd hand down. We didn't talk much in the elevator. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, I heard them before I saw them, the easy laughter of people who think they've already won. Champagne on ice in the corner. My son's voice above the rest. The receptionist stood up flustered. Ma'am, this is a private closing. You can't. It's all right, I said, and I kept walking, and Miriam walked beside me, and I pushed open the glass door to that room myself. They were all there. Damon at the head of the table in a suit like armor mid-sentence glowing. Douglas Vaughn beside him, silver and watchful. Half a dozen investors and their lawyers. Bianca in a chair by the window, hands folded, that thread of worry still on her. And Gloria Pruitt, in white, of course, seated like a queen who'd been promised a crown. The laughter died when the door opened. Damon turned and I watched my son's face travel a whole country of feeling in about 2 seconds. Confusion first, then embarrassment, then a flash of something close to panic. The look of a man whose 2 worlds have just walked into the same room. "Ma?" He stood halfway up. "Mom, what this isn't, you can't be here right now. This is a business closing." He tried a laugh for the room, that charming laugh. "Folks, I'm so sorry, this is my mother. She must be Ma. Is everything okay? Did something happen? Let me call you a car." "Sit down, Damon," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I've never had to raise my voice. But something in it put him back in his chair like a hand on his shoulder, and I saw a few of the investors glance at each other. Miriam stepped up to the table and set the file down on it. The weight of it made a sound in that quiet room, a solid 41-year sound. I looked around the table at all those expensive faces, and then I said the thing I'd waited most of my life to say. "Gentlemen," I let my eyes travel the room, taking my time the way they'd never once taken time with me. "For 2 years now, you've been trying to reach the owner of the Elmwood block. You've hired title searchers. You've filed petitions. You've called that owner a ghost, a shell, a holdout." I laid my hand flat on the file. "You could have saved yourselves the trouble. You could have just come to Sunday dinner." Silence, the kind you could hold in your hand. Vaughn was the first to understand men like Vaughn always are. His eyes went from me to the file to Damon, and the color started leaving his face. "Miriam," I said. She opened the file. She's a professional. She laid it out clean and slow, one document at a time, turning each so the room could see. "This is the deed of record for the parcels at Delacroix and Vine, and the 4 surrounding lots, the central block of the Elmwood Crossing development. Recorded 1984 through 1991. Held in trust by Ridgeline Holdings." She set down the next page. "These are the trust's operating documents, and this," she placed the last one and turned it toward my son, "is the identity of Ridgeline Holdings' sole managing officer, its only living principal, the one signature, ladies and gentlemen, without which not one shovel of this project can legally break ground." Damon stared at the page. I watched him read the name. I watched him read it again because the mind refuses a thing like that the first time. "Olivia R. Grant. The R is for Ridgeline. My mother's people. I've carried it my whole life, right there in the middle of my own name, and my son never once thought to wonder. That's," his voice cracked, "that's not Mom, that's your name. Ridgeline is that's you." He looked up at me, and for a second he wasn't a developer or a manager or a man in armor. He was a boy who just found out the floor he'd been standing on his whole life was somebody's hand. "You own it. You've owned it the whole time. 2 years I've been. You sat at dinner, you heard me. You heard me every Sunday, and you never—" "I heard you, baby," I said gently. "I heard every word. That was rather the point." That's when Gloria stood up. I'd wondered if she would. She's not built to sit quiet while a room slips out of her control, and hers was slipping fast. Her chair scraped back, and she came up in all that white chin high, doing the thing she does. The thing that's carried her 40 years, filling the room with noise, so nobody notices the ground moving. "This is absurd," she announced. "This is an ambush. A sentimental old woman does not get to walk in here and blow up a $40 million transaction because her feelings are hurt. There are contracts. There are investors. There are obligations, and my firm has staked its reputation and its capital on this deal, and I will not sit here while she gestured at me, at my suit, at my hands, and couldn't quite find a word cruel enough and clean enough at the same time. "Prewitt Realty," Miriam said very mildly, "would be the firm that pledged its assets to backstop the investor syndicate. That is confidential, and it is none of your—" "Mrs. Prewitt?" Miriam reached into the file and drew out one more folder, a thin one, and slid it down the length of the table until it came to rest exactly in front of Gloria. "You should sit down and read that before you say anything else." Gloria didn't want to. You could see she didn't want to. But something in Miriam's voice, the flat, kind, terrible certainty of it, got into her, and she opened the folder, and she read. I watched the noise drain out of Gloria Prewitt like water out of a cracked pot, because it was her note. Her distressed debt, the millstone her own bank had been so desperate to sell. Purchased 11 days ago, quietly at a discount through a holding company. Ridgeline Holdings. Mine. She read it twice. Everybody reads it twice. And then she looked up at me. And for the first time in 15 years, Gloria Prewitt had absolutely nothing to say. The woman who'd called me a facility case, who'd asked who invited the church lady, who'd wanted to file me somewhere appropriate, that woman sat down slowly in her white suit and understood that she had been this whole time standing on my land, in my debt, at my mercy. Church lady holds your paper now, Gloria, I said. Not cruel, just true. Sit down. We're not finished. She sat. Now, here is where they all expected the hammer to fall. I could feel it in the room, the investors already calculating their losses. Vaughn already reaching for his phone. My son gone gray, Gloria bracing to drown. They thought they knew this story. Bitter old woman gets power. Bitter old woman burns it all down. They thought I'd come 40 floors up to watch them all lose everything. They didn't know Walter. Miriam, I said, the last document. She reached into the very bottom of the file and brought out something that made the older lawyers in the room lean forward, not a deed, but a will, and clipped to it a small drive. When my husband set up the Ridgeline Trust, I said he wrote a provision into it, a private one. It was never recorded in any public register, which is why none of your title searchers ever found it, and why you all believed this land could be developed. On paper from the outside, it looked like open ground. I nodded at Miriam, and she turned a screen toward the table, and there was Walter. 9 years gone, and there was my husband filling up that glass tower with his slow, deep voice, recorded a month before he passed in the front room of the house. He built the wall of children's names behind him. If you're watching this, Walter said, then somebody finally came for Elmwood the way I always knew they would. Money's got a long memory for land and a short one for the folks who kept it alive. So I'm going to make this simple. He held up a hand and ticked it off on his big fingers. This land does not get sold for luxury. Not ever. Not a tower, not a lounge, not a gate. The trust forbids it, and Livy holds the trust, and Livy is the only soul on God's earth who can say what happens to this ground. Whatever they've offered, and I'm sure it's a pretty number, the answer built into this trust is no. He leaned closer to the camera, and I swear he looked right at his son across 9 years. Elmwood belongs to the people who stayed when it was worth nothing. That's the whole deed. That's the whole point. Everything else is just paper. The screen went dark. Nobody in that room moved. Some of them, I think, had never in their lives been in the presence of a thing that couldn't be bought and didn't quite know what to do with the feeling. So here is what's going to happen, I said, and I stood up straight in my plum suit and I laid out the new order, plain and fair, and past all arguing. Elmwood Crossing, as you've drawn it, is dead. It was always dead. It died the day my husband signed this trust. You just didn't know you were selling a corpse. I let that sit. But I'm not in the business of ruining people. My husband wasn't, and neither am I. So I'm not going to walk out of here and let this land sit empty out of spite while good families get priced out of the only neighborhood they've ever known. That's not justice. That's just a different kind of tower. I turned to Miriam and she began handing out the new papers, the ones we'd sat up 3 nights preparing. The entire Elmwood block goes into a community land trust. Rents held at what the people already living there can actually pay, fixed, protected, permanent. Nobody who stayed gets pushed out. Not now, not in 20 years. The community house stays exactly where it is, gets restored to the last brick, and goes back to doing what it's done for 38 years. I looked at the investors. For those of you who want to build something Elmwood actually needs, clinics, groceries, homes, working people can afford, there's a real project here, and a fair return, and my door is open. For those of you who only came for the tower, there's the elevator. 2 of the investors were already nodding. That surprised me, and it shouldn't have. There's always a few who are only in the wrong room. And it'll be run, I went on, by someone who's been fighting for this neighborhood longer and harder than any of you knew. Someone who's had eyes on every piece of this deal from the inside. I found her at the back of the room where she'd slipped in behind us, my Nia in her plain dark dress, come to see the end of the thing she'd helped me build. My granddaughter, Nia Grant. She's been my partner in this from the beginning. The whole table turned to look at her. And Damon, oh my son. Damon looked at his own daughter and finally understood the last piece, that the girl he'd brought to his gala to stand pretty by the family. The daughter he'd told a room full of men had nobody home to fight him, had been Walter's eyes and mine all along. Nia, he said hoarse. You've this whole time you knew. Nia looked at her father and there were tears standing in her eyes, but her chin was up. Walter's chin. My chin, the Grant chin, and her voice didn't shake. Somebody in this family had to remember who we are, Dad, she said. Grandma never forgot. She just waited for the rest of us to be worth telling. That left Gloria and my son. I dealt with Gloria first because it was simpler. I walked around the table and I stood in front of her, and I said quiet just for her, though the room could hear. Here's what I'll do. I'll forgive the worst of that note enough that Prewitt Realty lives. You'll walk out of here with your company and your name. In exchange, you'll withdraw from this project publicly and completely, and you'll never speak a word against this trust as long as you're able." She stared at me. "Why?" she managed. "You could bury me. You've got the paper. Why wouldn't you?" "Because I am not you, Gloria." I said it without heat, and that's what landed it. "I don't need you on your knees. I never did. I just needed you to know one time before you die exactly whose land you were standing on when you called me a church lady." I patted her hand where it lay on the table, her hand ringed and manicured next to mine, worn and plain. "There, now you know. Go on, home." She went. She didn't say thank you. I didn't expect her to, but I saw her at the door stop and look back at me. Really look for the first time in 15 years, and I believe something shifted in her that morning. Maybe not enough, but something. And then it was just my son. The room had emptied out around us, lawyers gathering papers, investors murmuring into phones, Vaughn shaking Miriam's hand with the grim respect of a man who knows he's been beaten clean. Bianca had come to stand behind Damon's chair with her hands on his shoulders, and I saw that the worry had gone out of her face, and something quieter had come in relief, maybe. The house was safe. I'd made sure of that first thing. The guarantee dissolved with the deal the mortgage released. Whatever else happened, my grandchild's roof was solid. Damon sat there like a man who'd been emptied out. "You could have told me," he said. "Any Sunday. Any of 100 Sundays you could have just told me. Why let me go this far? Why let me humiliate myself in front of—" He stopped, started over smaller. "Why, Ma?" I pulled out the chair beside him and I sat, so we were eye to eye, mother and son, the way we used to be at the reading table 37 years ago. "Because 100 Sundays ago, baby, you wouldn't have heard me," I said. "You'd have heard a sweet old woman who got lucky with some land. You had to find out the hard way that the person you called a ghost, the person you told your boss had nobody home, that she was home the whole time. That she was the strongest hand at every table you ever sat at. You needed to lose to me before you could hear me." I took his hand. "Now, are you listening?" He nodded. My grown son, 44 years old, nodded like a boy. "You helped build that house," I said. "You put your own name in that wall right down where I could kneel and show a little boy his letters. You forgot. So I'm not going to take everything from you, and I'm not going to give you everything back. I'm going to give you a chance." I laid the last paper in front of him, the one I'd had Miriam draw up special, the one nobody else had seen. "You want a place in this trust. You want back into this family's real work. Then you're going to earn it the way your father earned it. For 1 year, you come home to Elmwood. You put down the suit, and you pick up a trowel, and you rebuild the community house with your own 2 hands under Clarence, who laid brick beside your daddy, and who will not let you cut a single corner. You restore that wall, every name, including yours." My voice caught just once, and I let it. "Trust isn't bought with words, Damon. Not in this family. You want it back. You build it back. Literally." He looked at the paper. He looked at the city out the glass, and down somewhere down there at the low brown roofs. And then my son put his face in his hands, and for the first time since he was a boy in front of his wife and his mother and the wreckage of his big deal, Damon Grant wept. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I did when he was 7 and feverish, and I let him. Some walls you have to break before you can build them right. It's spring now. I take my coffee on the porch these mornings the way I always have, and I watch the light come up gold over Elmwood, my Elmwood safe now deeded to the people who stayed. Across the street and down at the corner of Delacroix and Vine, the community house is coming back to life, scaffold up one side, the good smell of fresh mortar in the air. And there up on a ladder in a dusty T-shirt with a trowel in his hand and old Clarence hollering corrections up at him is my son. He comes every day. He's lost the softness in his hands and found some in his face. Yesterday I watched him climb down and go to the front wall, the one with all the names, and kneel in front of it, and put his fingers against a spot down low at knee height. I knew which spot. He knelt there a long while. Then he looked over his shoulder across the street to where I sat on my porch with my coffee. I didn't wave. I didn't smile big. I just gave him the smallest nod in the history of the world, the same one his daughter gave me across a ballroom full of champagne. "I see you, I'm with you. Keep going." He nodded back and turned to his wall. Nia runs the trust now out of the back room of the house, a 20-year-old girl with her grandfather's chin keeping a whole neighborhood from being flooded away. Gloria kept her company, and last I heard keeps her mouth shut. And Bianca started coming by on her own. No Damon, just her. And one morning last week, she sat down on my porch step and looked at me a good while and finally said, "Mama Olivia, would you teach me how you held on to all of it all those years and never let anybody see? I want to know how you did that." I laughed. First real laugh in a long time. "Oh, baby," I said, "sit down. Pour yourself some coffee. That's a long story, and it starts with a man and a flashlight and a jar of money in the wall. They spent 40 years looking right past me. I used every single one of them. Down at the corner in the front window of the house, there's a new sign now hand-painted by the neighborhood kids. Nia hung it herself. The Walter Grant Community House. And under it, smaller in a child's careful letters, built by those who stayed.